Are you lost too,
Are you
mister?
lost too, mister?
A little girl, innocent question to the heartbroken Duke. What he did next changed everything. Edmund Ashford had abandoned hope, left stranded in the bitter reality of a broken heart. His world was empty, his future uncertain. But when a little girl with a basket of holly asked him, "Are you lost too, mister?" he didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. Hey, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Wandering Heart. The grand railway station blazed with Christmas Eve splendor, a cathedral of iron and glass transformed into something almost magical. Train bells clanged in rhythmic chaos, while children's laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings, their voices bright with anticipation. The warm, nostalgic scent of roasted chestnuts drifted from street vendors' carts stationed near the main entrance, mingling with the sharper smells of coal smoke and the metallic tang of steam that hissed from idling locomotives. Red and green ribbons adorned every iron archway, twisted into elaborate bows that caught the gaslight and seemed to glow. Near the central platform, a group of carolers in matching scarves lifted their voices in harmony, their rendition of "Hark, the Herald Angels Sing," rising above the general din. Families embraced near the platforms, reuniting after long separations or departing for holiday visits. Porters hauled leather trunks decorated with sprigs of holly, their breath forming white clouds in the cold air that swept in each time the great brass doors swung open. Everything shimmered with festive promise, the polished brass fittings gleaming like gold, the marble floors reflecting candlelight from the decorative sconces, the velvet coats and fur-trimmed cloaks of travelers swirling in a kaleidoscope of wealth and warmth. It was, by all accounts, a scene of pure Christmas joy. Duke Edmund Ashford stood apart from it all, a solitary figure beside a marble pillar, and felt absolutely nothing. He was a tall man in his early 30s, broad-shouldered and well-built, dressed in an expensive greatcoat of charcoal wool that spoke of wealth without ostentation. His dark hair was immaculately groomed, his strong jaw clean-shaven, his gloved hands clasped behind his back in a posture that might have suggested aristocratic bearing if not for the defeated slump of his shoulders. Fine clothing marked him as nobility, the cut of his coat, the quality of his boots, the signet ring just visible beneath his glove, but his posture spoke of something else entirely. Defeat, hollowness, a man occupying space without truly inhabiting it. His grey eyes, once bright with intelligence and humor, now held only a dull flatness as they tracked the movements around him with detached observation. A family of 4 hurried past, the father carrying a small girl on his shoulders while the mother herded 2 boys toward their platform. The girl shrieked with delight, waving a wooden toy horse. Edmund watched them disappear into the crowd. All this joy, he thought, his internal voice sharp with cynicism. All this performance. And for what? So they can return to their ordinary lives and ordinary disappointments, having pretended for one day that love conquers all. The bitterness of his thoughts didn't escape him. He'd once been different, hopeful, even. He'd once believed in the things these people celebrated. Love, family, the promise of a shared future. That man felt like a stranger now, someone Edmund had been in another lifetime. 3 months. It had been 3 months since Lady Victoria Hawke had sent him the letter that shattered everything he'd believed about his life. Not even a face-to-face conversation, not even the courtesy of meeting him to end their engagement properly. Just a letter, delivered by her lady's maid to his London residence while he'd been at Parliament. He could still recite it from memory, though he'd long since burned the physical evidence of his humiliation. Dearest Edmund, it had begun. The audacity of that endearment still stung. I write to you with news that I fear will distress you, though I hope upon reflection you will come to see the wisdom in my decision. I have accepted Lord Pemberton's proposal of marriage. You must understand, Edmund, that affection alone cannot sustain a life of the quality I require. Lord Pemberton can offer me security that transcends sentiment. His position, his connections, his wealth, these are not trivial considerations for a woman of sense. I hope you will not think too harshly of me. We would not have been happy in the long term. This is better for us both. I wish you every happiness in your future. Yours in friendship, Victoria. Affection alone, security that transcends sentiment. As if love were a luxury one, indulged only when all practical matters had been satisfied first. Edmund had believed she loved him. He'd been a complete fool. The memory rose unbidden, as it so often did. Last spring, in the gardens of Ashford Estate, the roses had been in full bloom, the air sweet with their perfume. He'd led Victoria down the gravel path to the fountain, the same fountain where his parents had become engaged a generation before, and there, on one knee, he'd offered her his grandmother's ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, worth a fortune but valuable to him for entirely different reasons. "Victoria, you've made me believe in things I'd stopped hoping for. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my companion in all things?" She'd smiled such a beautiful smile, her blue eyes bright with what he'd interpreted as joy and accepted. They'd kissed beside the fountain while birds sang overhead, and the whole world seemed to align in perfect harmony. He'd been certain, absolutely certain, that they'd found something rare. Love without calculation, affection without agenda. Had it been genuine? Had any of it? Or had she been performing even then, weighing his proposal against other possibilities, waiting to see if something better materialized? The memory dissolved like smoke, leaving only ash and bitterness behind. Since the letter arrived in September, Edmund had withdrawn from everything that had once defined his life. He'd stopped attending social functions, claiming illness that no one truly believed but that protocol required them to accept. He'd abandoned his seat in Parliament, sending perfunctory excuses that grew increasingly threadbare. Most damningly, he'd ceased managing his estate, the ancient lands and properties that had been his family's responsibility for generations. Mr. Pemberton, his steward, no relation to Lord Pemberton, though the coincidence of names twisted like a knife, wrote increasingly desperate letters. Neglected drainage in the South Fields, flooding, destroying winter wheat crops, tenant cottages with failing roofs, accounts overdue with suppliers who were beginning to question the Ashford family's creditworthiness. Each letter arrived at Edmund's London residence, and each one Edmund filed away unread after the first few lines. What was the point? He'd worked for years to improve his estate, to increase his fortune, to secure his position in society, all to make himself worthy of love, to prove he could provide the kind of life a woman deserved. And it hadn't mattered. His title, Duke of Ashford, an ancient and respected name, hadn't been grand enough. His wealth, considerable by most standards, hadn't been vast enough. His person, educated, relatively young, not unhandsome according to his valet's occasional comments, hadn't been enough. I hadn't been enough. So why continue pretending any of it mattered? Edmund wasn't sure what had drawn him to the railway station on Christmas Eve. He'd been wandering London's streets for hours, avoiding his empty townhouse, unwilling to travel to his estate, where memories lurked in every corner. The station had simply been there, warm and bright and full of people, and he'd stepped inside, seeking, what? Distraction? The comfort of being alone in a crowd? The masochistic pleasure of watching others enjoy what he'd lost? He'd found himself before the station's magnificent centerpiece, a 20-foot pine tree positioned in the center of the main hall. It was decorated with careful artistry, glass ornaments catching the light, strings of cranberries looping through the branches, real candles flickering in holders designed to prevent fires. At the top, a crystal star sparkled like captured starlight. Edmund stared at it, seeing nothing. The beauty registered intellectually, but failed to penetrate the numbness that had become his constant companion. Around him, families gathered for photographs, queuing patiently for the photographer who'd set up his equipment near the tree. A young couple stood beneath a lower branch, exchanging wrapped gifts with shy smiles. The woman opened hers, first a book, by the look of it, and her delighted laughter rang out as she kissed her sweetheart's cheek. An elderly man in a worn but respectable coat embraced his grandchildren as they threw themselves at him with the abandon of the very young, their voices high with excitement as they pulled him toward the platforms. Edmund observed it all with the detachment of someone watching a theatrical performance in a foreign language. He could see the movements, recognize the patterns of human affection and connection, but he could not grasp the meaning. It was as if he stood behind glass, separated from the warmth and life that surrounded him by an invisible but impenetrable barrier. I don't belong here, he thought, the realization settling over him with cold finality. I don't belong anywhere anymore. The isolation wasn't physical. The station pressed around him with hundreds of travelers, their voices and movements creating a symphony of human activity. But Edmund felt profoundly, utterly alone. more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. Even in the darkest days of his childhood, raised by parents who treated him more as an heir than a son, he'd had hope. He'd believed that somewhere, somehow, authentic connection existed and that he might find it. Victoria had stolen that hope. Or perhaps she'd simply revealed the truth he'd been too naive to see, that in this world, everything was transactional. Love was a pleasant fiction, people told themselves, but in the end, security and status won. Always. Edmund turned away from the Christmas tree, from the joy he could no longer access, from the families and couples whose happiness felt like a personal rebuke. It was time to leave, to return to his empty townhouse, his cold rooms, his bitter solitude. To stop torturing himself with visions of what he'd never have. He'd taken perhaps 3 steps when a small voice cut through the noise of the station like a bell, clear and bright and impossibly innocent. "Are you lost too, mister?" Edmund went very still. The words seemed to hang in the air, as if the entire chaotic station had paused to hear them. Slowly, very slowly, he looked down. Standing before him was a little girl. Chapter 2. An innocent interruption. Standing before him was a little girl, perhaps 7 years old, with golden curls escaping from beneath a hand-knit cap of pale blue wool. Her eyes, impossibly bright, impossibly blue, held no judgment, no pity, only open curiosity as she gazed up at him. She wore a faded red ribbon in her hair, carefully tied in a bow that spoke of patient hands and mourning rituals. Her woolen dress was simple, a soft grey that had clearly been mended at the hem, with stitches so small and precise they were almost invisible. The dress was spotlessly clean despite its obvious age, pressed with care that transcended its humble origins. She clutched a small wicker basket filled with holly sprigs and scraps of ribbon red and green, some velvet, some satin, all clearly salvaged from larger projects. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her small nose slightly red. Her mittens didn't match, one was dark blue, the other a lighter shade with a small repair at the thumb, and yet they'd been knit with obvious love. The stitches even and tight. Everything about her spoke of careful poverty and abundant love, a child who had little but was cherished beyond measure. Edmund's first instinct was dismissal. He opened his mouth to tell her he was fine, that she should return to her family, that he didn't require assistance from children in railway stations. The words formed on his tongue, polite and distant, the aristocratic deflection he'd perfected over years of unwanted social interactions. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was her complete lack of self-consciousness. She didn't fidget or look away, didn't shrink from his fine clothes or obvious wealth. She simply stood there, waiting for his answer, with the patient expectation of a child who believes adults will be honest with her. Perhaps it was the genuine concern in her expression, not performative sympathy or calculated kindness, but real worry for a stranger she perceived as struggling. Or perhaps it was simply that no one, not one single person, had asked him a direct, honest question in 3 months, not since Victoria's letter arrived. Everyone had either avoided him entirely or approached with careful platitudes that said nothing and meant less. "I suppose I am," Edmund heard himself say, his voice rougher than intended. "Lost, that is." Lily's face brightened with a smile that transformed her entirely. It was like watching sunrise break over a landscape, sudden, radiant, full of uncomplicated joy. "It's okay to be lost sometimes," she said with the casual wisdom of the very young, as if she'd just solved a complex philosophical problem. "Mama says being lost is just being somewhere you haven't figured out yet. Christmas is for finding things again." Edmund blinked. The simplicity of it, the strange, unexpected profundity, wrapped in a child's straightforward language, caught him completely off guard. Being lost is just being somewhere you haven't figured out yet. When had anything in his adult life been explained with such clarity? "Is that so?" he managed. "Mm-hmm." Lily nodded vigorously, her curls bouncing. "I got lost in the market once. I was scared I thought I'd never see Mama again. But then she found me, and she said, 'See, Lily, you were never really lost. I always knew where you were. You just didn't know where you were.'" She paused, her small face scrunching in concentration. "I think that's what she meant, anyway. I was only 5 then. I'm 7 now." Despite himself, despite the armor of cynicism he'd worn for months, the bitterness that had become his constant companion, Edmund felt his mouth twitch, almost a smile. The sensation felt foreign, muscles unused for so long they'd nearly forgotten their purpose. "That seems very wise," he said. "Mama is very wise. Lily stated this as absolute, incontrovertible fact, the way she might declare the sky was blue or winter was cold. Are you waiting for a train? No, I was just walking. Lily's head tilted slightly, a small gesture of confusion. On Christmas Eve? Don't you have anywhere to be? The question, so innocently delivered, landed like a physical blow. The child hadn't meant it cruelly, she was simply curious, trying to understand why someone would wander alone on this most family-centered of evenings, but the truth of it struck Edmund with devastating force. No, I don't have anywhere to be. His townhouse stood empty, except for a skeleton staff who'd been given the evening off. His estate in the country held nothing but memories and neglected responsibilities. His seat in Parliament sat vacant. The social calendar that had once filled his days with obligations and engagements now existed without his name on any guest list, partially by his choice, partially because invitations had quietly stopped arriving after Victoria's very public engagement to Lord Pemberton. He had nowhere to be, no one waiting for him, nothing requiring his presence. Instead of retreating, instead of making his excuses and fleeing back to his comfortable isolation, Edmund found himself doing something unexpected. He crouched down, lowering himself to Lily's level with a movement that felt rusty, unpracticed. When had he last spoken to a child? Years, certainly. Perhaps not since he was a child himself. "What's your name, little one?" he asked. "Lily Margaret Briarwood." She delivered this with great dignity, drawing herself up to her full height as if presenting credentials at a formal introduction. "What's yours?" Edmund considered lying, giving a false name to maintain distance, to keep this interaction contained and temporary. John Smith, William Brown, any common name that would let him remain anonymous. But something about her open face, her transparent honesty, made deception feel not just wrong but impossible, as if lying to this child would be a moral failure he couldn't quite bring himself to commit. "Edmund," he said. "Edmund Ashford." "That's a very fancy name," Lily observed. No judgment in her tone, just recognition of fact. "Are you fancy?" "Some people think so. But what do you think?" "What do I think?" The question hung in the air between them. Edmund realized, with a jolt of surprise, that no one had asked him that, not about anything meaningful, in longer than he could remember. "What do you think, Edmund? Not what does society expect, or what would be strategically advantageous, or what would best serve your interests. Just, what do you think?" "I think names are just sounds we make to identify ourselves," he said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke. "They don't tell you anything important about who a person really is." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a scholar contemplating a philosophical treatise. Her small brow furrowed slightly. "I think my name is perfect because Mama chose it. She says I'm named for the lily of the valley flowers that grew where she and Papa got married. They're small and white and smell like springtime." A shadow crossed her young face, brief, barely there, but Edmund caught it, the first crack in her cheerful composure. "Papa's gone now," she said quietly. "He left us 2 winters ago." The euphemism was clear. Edmund felt his chest tighten with unexpected empathy. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it with a sincerity that surprised him. He knew loss, after all, different from hers. Certainly he'd lost a future rather than a past, a fantasy rather than reality, but loss nonetheless. "That must be very hard." "It's all right." Lily brightened again with the remarkable resilience of children, bouncing back from sadness with a speed adults could never manage. "Mama says he's watching over us and that he'd want us to be happy. We come to the station on Christmas Eve because Papa used to work here. We remember him here, with all the magic and the people and the trains going to wonderful places. He loved the trains. Mama says he knew every schedule by heart." Edmund felt something shift in his chest, a small movement, like ice beginning to crack. This child had lost her father. She lived in obvious poverty, wore mended clothes and mismatched mittens, and yet she stood in a railway station on Christmas Eve, smiling, sharing her basket of salvaged ribbons, speaking of her loss with gentle acceptance rather than bitter complaint. What right did he have to his misery? Lily shifted her basket to one arm and reached out, taking Edmund's gloved hand with her small, mitten-covered one. The gesture was so trusting, so utterly unguarded, that Edmund's throat tightened unexpectedly. When had anyone last touched him with such uncomplicated affection? Even Victoria's touches had been measured, appropriate, always conscious of propriety and observation. "You should come with me and Mama," Lily said, looking up at him with absolute confidence in his acceptance. "We're having Christmas here at the station." It's not fancy, she used his word with a little conspiratorial smile, as if they were sharing a private joke. But we have biscuits Mama baked, and Mr. Chester the porter brings tea, and Mrs. Davies tells stories about olden times, and it's warm and nice. You don't have to be lost anymore. Edmund should refuse. Every instinct of propriety, every lesson of his upbringing, every rule of his social class demanded he refuse. He should thank her politely, perhaps press a coin into her hand for her kindness, extract himself from this bizarre encounter, and return to his estate where he belonged. This child, this situation, it was absurd. He was a duke of the realm, standing in a railway station being invited to a gathering of, what, exactly? Working-class families? Servants and labourers? People who earned their living with their hands rather than inherited it through bloodlines. It wasn't his world. It had never been his world. But then again, his world had given him Victoria. His world had given him calculation, masked as love, ambition, dressed up as devotion, security valued above sentiment. His world had left him standing alone on Christmas Eve, hollow and bitter, and so profoundly isolated he could barely remember what genuine human warmth felt like. And this child, this small, kind, impossibly optimistic child, offered warmth. Edmund hesitated, torn between the man he'd been raised to be and something else, something he couldn't quite name. Lily looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes, patient, expectant, kind, not pushing, just waiting, confident he'd make the right choice. I would like that very much, Edmund heard himself say. Lily's smile could have lit the entire station. She didn't drop his hand. Instead, she began leading him through the crowded hall, chattering as she walked, weaving between travellers with the confidence of someone who knew every corner, every passage, every hidden space of this place. That's Mr. Williams. He works the ticket counter on the west side. He always saves the torn tickets for me so I can make paper chains for decorating. And there's Mrs. Chen. She sells flowers near the main entrance, but on Christmas Eve she gives them away to people who look sad. She says flowers are medicine for the heart. And that's, Mr. Chester. A porter in his 50s approached, his weathered face split by a genuine smile. His uniform was worn but clean, and he moved with the economy of motion that came from years of physical labor. He tipped his cap when he saw Lily. Miss Lily, Merry Christmas, little one. Merry Christmas, Mr. Chester. Lily practically bounced with excitement. This is Edmund. He's lost, but he's coming to our Christmas. Mr. Chester's eyes flickered over Edmund's expensive coat, his fine leather gloves, his polished boots. Edmund saw the assessment happening, working man evaluating nobleman, calculating the gulf between their stations, deciding how to respond. But Mr. Chester's smile didn't fade or become servile. It remained genuine, warm. Always room for one more, miss, he said. Your ma's by the little tree, sweetheart. She'll be glad to see you. As they continued walking, Edmund noticed how people responded to Lily, smiles and warm greetings wherever she went. A woman selling sweets pressed a candy cane into her free hand, waving away payment. A gentleman in a conductor's uniform ruffled her hair affectionately. The ticket collector at one of the platform gates called out a Christmas blessing. This child was beloved here, not for what she had, which was clearly very little, but for who she was, for her kindness, her cheer, her generous spirit that offered ribbons and holly to anyone who wanted them. It was something Edmund had once taken for granted in his own sphere. People smiled at dukes. They deferred, they flattered, they sought favor. But when had someone last smiled at him simply because his presence brought them joy? He couldn't remember. They turned a corner, away from the grand central hall with its magnificent tree and its crowds of fashionable travelers. Here, in a quieter section near a service corridor, the station showed a different face. The decorations were simpler, the crowds thinner, the gaslight dimmer, and here, positioned against a wall, sat a smaller tree, perhaps 6 feet tall, modestly decorated with paper chains, dried orange slices, and the scraps of ribbon Lily had clearly been collecting. Beside it, arranging a threadbare blanket on the cold floor, was a woman. She looked up at their approach, and Edmund's breath caught, not because she was beautiful, though she was, in an understated way that had nothing to do with fashion or artifice. Her beauty was quiet, earned through character rather than granted by features. She wore a simple grey dress, well made but worn, with a knit shawl around her shoulders. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, a few wisps escaping to frame her face. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Soft brown eyes that held the same quality he'd seen in Lily's: openness, warmth, and something else, something deeper. Recognition, as if she knew exactly what it meant to be lost, as if she'd been lost herself and found her way back. Chapter 3. The Gathering. "Mama, Mama, I found someone who's lost, just like I said I would." The woman rose gracefully despite the awkwardness of getting up from the floor, smoothing her grey dress with hands that moved with unconscious elegance. She was perhaps in her late 20s, though the lines around her eyes suggested experience beyond her years. Her dress was simple but well made, the kind of garment that spoke of skill and care in its construction, likely made by her own hands, Edmund thought. A knit shawl in soft cream wool draped around her shoulders, hand-worked with a delicate pattern. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though a few wisps had escaped to frame her face, softening the severity of the style. She had the kind of beauty that came from character rather than features, nothing dramatically striking about her, but something in her expression, her posture, that spoke of quiet strength. The kind of woman you might pass on the street without noticing, but who, once seen, became impossible to forget. "Lily, darling, you can't just—" She stopped mid-sentence as she took in Edmund, her eyes widening slightly as she registered his obvious wealth. His coat alone probably cost more than she earned in 6 months. A faint flush touched her cheeks, embarrassment coloring her pale skin. "I'm so sorry, sir. My daughter is enthusiastically friendly." "Please don't apologize," Edmund said, surprising himself with his quickness to defend Lily. "She's been nothing but kind." "Remarkably so. He said he's lost, Mama, and I said he could have Christmas with us, and he said yes." Lily beamed up at her mother, bouncing slightly on her toes with excitement. "His name is Edmund, and it's very fancy." The woman, Catherine, he would soon learn, pressed a hand to her forehead, clearly mortified by her daughter's boldness. "Sir, you're under no obligation. I'm sure you have family waiting, somewhere you need to be, and Lily shouldn't have presumed—" "I don't," Edmund interrupted quietly, the admission easier the second time. "I don't have anywhere to be, and if the invitation stands, I'd be honored to join you." Catherine's hand lowered slowly. Their eyes met, and Edmund felt something pass between them, understanding, perhaps, the recognition of shared loneliness. She saw something in him, he realized, that she recognized in herself, the particular isolation that came not from being alone, but from being alone in ways that mattered. "Catherine Briarwood," she said softly, extending her hand with a gesture that was neither servile nor presumptuous, simply courteous. "And you've met my daughter, Lily." "Edmund Ashford." He took her hand, noting even through his glove how different it felt from Victoria's had been. Work, roughened, warm, capable, honest hands. "Thank you for your kindness." "I'm not sure bringing you to sit on a cold floor constitutes kindness," Catherine said with a slight smile, "but you're welcome nonetheless." The corner Catherine had claimed was humble but thoughtfully arranged. The small tree stood in a wooden bucket filled with sand, its branches decorated with obvious love if little expense. Paper chains looped through the greenery. Mr. William's torn tickets, Edmund realized, carefully cut and glued into rings of red and white. Dried orange slices strung on thread caught what little light reached this quieter section, their edges curled and translucent. Scraps of ribbon, velvet and satin, red and green and gold, had been tied into bows and distributed throughout the branches. At the top, a paper angel gazed down with a slightly crooked halo, clearly made by Lily's careful hands. A worn wool blanket in faded blue served as their floor, protecting them from the cold marble. Several mismatched cushions had been arranged in a rough circle, some embroidered, some plain, all showing signs of extensive use. A small spirit lamp, its flame barely visible, heated a battered copper kettle that steamed gently. Beside it sat a dented tin that presumably held Catherine's biscuits, and several chipped cups waited to be filled. As Edmund stood awkwardly, unsure of the protocol for sitting on the floor at a railway station, a situation his upbringing had never prepared him for, other people began to arrive. An elderly woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a warm smile approached first, moving with the careful deliberation of someone managing arthritic joints. "Mrs. Davies, retired schoolteacher," Catherine introduced, rising to help the woman settle onto a cushion. "She tells the best stories. Mrs. Davies, this is Mr. Edmund Ashford." "A pleasure," Mrs. Davies said, her voice carrying the clear diction of someone who'd spent decades teaching children to speak properly. "Any friend of Miss Lily's is welcome here." A young couple followed, the woman visibly pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "Tom and Sarah Fletcher," Catherine said. "Tom works the night shift on the platforms." Tom, a solid young man with kind eyes, nodded respectfully. "Sir, good of you to join us." Mr. Chester, the porter Edmund had met earlier, arrived next, settling onto a cushion with a groan of relief. "These old bones appreciate a rest," he said, accepting a cup of tea from Catherine with grateful hands. Finally, two children appeared, siblings by their matching dark hair and similar features, perhaps 9 and 11. "The Walsh children," Catherine said gently. "Martin and Annie. Their mother works at the textile factory tonight. They spend Christmas Eve with us." Edmund lowered himself onto one of the cushions, feeling absurdly out of place. His coat alone probably cost more than everyone here earned in a month combined. He should feel superior. His breeding, his education, his entire upbringing demanded he maintain the distinction between his station and theirs. Instead, he felt exposed, uncertain, like an imposter in both worlds, too hollow to belong in his own sphere, too privileged to truly fit here. Catherine poured tea with practiced efficiency, the stream of dark liquid steady as she filled the chipped cups. She handed one to Edmund with an apologetic smile. "Not fine china, I'm afraid. The cup has a small chip on the rim, mind it when you drink." "It's perfect," Edmund said, cradling the warm cup in his gloved hands. And strangely, it was. The tea was strong and hot, better somehow than what his servants made in his London townhouse, perhaps because it was offered freely, without the transaction of service and payment, without the distance of master and servant. Lily distributed holly sprigs from her basket, moving around the circle with solemn purpose. When she reached Edmund, she explained carefully. "We each get one to make a Christmas wish on. Mama says the holly represents hope because it stays green even in winter, when everything else dies back. It reminds us that life continues, even in the darkest times." Edmund accepted the sprig, its leaves waxy and bright, the red berries perfect small spheres. The pagan symbolism wasn't lost on him. Holly had been sacred long before Christianity claimed it. "What do you wish for?" he asked Lily. She considered this with great seriousness, her small brow furrowing. "I can't tell you or it won't come true, but it's a good wish, an important one." She tilted her head, studying him. "What will you wish for? To feel something again, to stop being numb, to believe that love is real and not just another transaction in a world of endless calculations." But he couldn't say that to a 7-year-old child surrounded by people who'd shown him nothing but kindness. "I'll have to think about it," Edmund said. The evening unfolded with surprising warmth. Mrs. Davies told a story about St. Nicholas, not the commercialized, jolly figure of modern imagination, but the original tale of the 4th century bishop who gave in secret, who threw bags of gold through windows to save 3 sisters from destitution. Her voice carried the practiced cadence of a born storyteller, and even the adults listened with rapt attention. Tom Fletcher shared that he and Sarah had chosen to work Christmas Eve specifically so other workers with young children could have the day off. "Seems right," he said simply. "Sarah and I will have our Christmas tomorrow, but families with little ones shouldn't have to choose between wages and holiday memories." Sarah smiled at her husband with such open affection that Edmund had to look away, the intimacy of it too raw to witness. Mr. Chester passed around a small flask of brandy for the adults' tea, with a conspiratorial wink at the children, who giggled at being deliberately excluded from adult secrets. The brandy was rough but warming, and Edmund found himself grateful for it as the evening grew colder. Catherine said little, but Edmund found himself watching her more than was probably polite. The way she adjusted Sarah Fletcher's shawl when the younger woman shivered, doing it so naturally that Sarah barely seemed to notice. How she saved the largest biscuit for Mrs. Davies, whom Edmund suspected didn't eat regularly based on the thinness of her frame beneath her heavy coat. The gentle correction, when Lily interrupted Mrs. Davies' story, done with such love that it carried no sting. "Lily, dear, let Mrs. Davies finish. You can share your thought when she's done." Catherine moved through the small gathering like a shepherd tending her flock, attentive without being obvious, caring without making anyone feel pitied. She caught him watching once. Their eyes met across the circle. She didn't look away, and neither did he. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, of mutual observation, of curiosity, of something unnamed that Edmund wasn't quite ready to examine. "Mr. Edmund," Lily's voice broke the moment, "will you help me decorate the tree more? I made another paper chain, but I'm too short to reach the good branches." Edmund glanced at Catherine, who nodded permission with a slight smile that made something warm unfurl in his chest. He rose, joints stiff from sitting on the floor, and Lily handed him a chain made of newsprint carefully cut, glued with precision far beyond what he'd expect from a 7-year-old. "Mama taught me how," Lily explained as Edmund reached up to loop the chain over a higher branch. "She says anything worth doing is worth doing carefully, even if no one else notices. The care matters, not the recognition." "Your mother is very wise," Edmund said, adjusting the chain so it hung evenly. "Everyone says that." Lily beamed up at him. "But I think you're the first fancy person to say it. Usually fancy people don't notice Mama at all." The casual observation delivered without rancor, simply stating fact, struck Edmund like a blow. How many times had he passed working people without truly seeing them? How many servants, labourers, clerks had been invisible to him, noticed only when they failed in their duties? "Fancy doesn't mean much," Edmund found himself saying. "Not when it counts." They worked together in companionable silence for a moment, Edmund following Lily's exacting instructions about where each decoration should be placed. Then she tugged his coat, her small face suddenly serious. "Mr. Edmund, are you sad about something?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that Edmund had no prepared deflection, no aristocratic evasion ready. "Yes," he said simply. "I am. It's okay to be sad. Mama was sad for a long time after Papa left us. Sometimes she still is, late at night when she thinks I'm asleep. But she says, sadness is just love with nowhere to go." Lily paused, considering her own words. "Maybe you need to find somewhere for your love to go." Edmund's throat tightened, out of the mouths of babes. When he returned to the circle, Catherine was alone. The others had moved away to admire the tree, to refill their tea, to give the widow and the stranger a moment of privacy that Edmund suspected Catherine had orchestrated. "You're good with her," Catherine said quietly, her eyes on Lily as the child showed Annie Walsh how to make a paper star. "Not everyone knows how to talk to children. Really talk to them, I mean, not down to them." "She makes it easy," Edmund replied, settling back onto his cushion. "She's remarkable. You've raised her beautifully." "She is." Catherine's smile was tender, but sad. "She's had to grow up too quickly. When my husband died." She stopped, took a breath, her hands tightening on her teacup. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this." "Please," Edmund said, leaning forward slightly, genuine interest in his voice. "I'd like to hear, if you'd like to share." Catherine studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust this wealthy stranger who'd stumbled into her Christmas gathering. Finally, slowly, she began to speak. "My husband, Thomas, was a junior clerk here at the station. He worked in the freight office, managing manifests and schedules. We married for love, against my family's wishes. She paused, pain flickering across her face. "They cut me off, completely. No dowry, no inheritance, no contact. My father said I'd made my choice and I'd have to live with the consequences." "That must have been devastating," Edmund said softly. "It was. But Thomas," Catherine's expression softened with memory. "Thomas wasn't wealthy or titled. He couldn't offer me the life I'd been raised for, but he loved Lily and me with everything he had. When he died in an accident, a cargo handling mistake, they said, heavy crates fell, we had nothing. No savings to speak of, no family to turn to. Just each other." She looked at Edmund directly, her brown eyes holding his with quiet intensity. "I know what it's like to lose everything, Mr. Ashford, to wonder if you can survive it. To wake up every morning wondering how you'll feed your child, pay the rent, keep going when everything inside you wants to simply stop." Edmund felt each word like a weight settling on his chest. "But you have survived it," he said. "You and Lily both." "We have." Catherine's smile was small but real. "We have survived it." Edmund realized with sudden, crystalline clarity. She's not just surviving. She's living. That's the difference. Chapter 4. Stories in the Lamplight. The natural light had faded while they'd been talking, the winter afternoon giving way to evening with that particular swiftness of December days. The gas lamps in the main hall of the station burned bright, but here in their quiet corner, the illumination came primarily from candles, simple tallow candles, that Catherine and the others had brought, their flames wavering slightly in the drafts that swept through the station. The smell of melting wax mingled with the lingering scent of cinnamon from Catherine's biscuits, now reduced to crumbs in the tin. The tea had cooled, but no one seemed inclined to reheat it. The wool blanket and cushions had absorbed the warmth of the bodies sitting on them, creating a small island of comfort against the marble floor's chill. Around them, the sounds of the station had changed. Fewer arrivals now, more departures as families rushed to catch their trains home for Christmas. The voices had a different quality, softer somehow, tired children being carried by weary parents. Edmund realized with surprise that he'd been here for over 2 hours. 2.5 perhaps, the longest social interaction he'd had since September that hadn't left him feeling hollow and performative. The others had drawn away with tactful distance. Mrs. Davies had taken the children to watch the trains on a nearby platform. Mr. Chester had returned to his duties, and the Fletchers had departed for Tom's shift. The space felt suddenly intimate, just Edmund and Catherine sitting across from each other in the candlelight, with only Lily nearby, drowsing against a cushion with the contentment of a well-loved child. Edmund found himself speaking more freely than he had in months. Not about Victoria, something in him resisted naming her yet, as if speaking of her would give her power over this moment, but about other things, true things. "People see the title," he said, staring into his now cold tea as if it held answers. "The Duke of Ashford. They see the estate, the seat in Parliament, the invitations to royal functions, the position I hold in society." He paused, searching for words. "But they don't see the man. Or perhaps they do see him, and simply don't find him as interesting as what he represents, what he can provide, what advantage he might offer." Catherine listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful in the flickering candlelight. Her face, softened by the warm glow, looked younger somehow, or perhaps just less guarded than it had been when he'd first arrived. "That must be terribly lonely," she said quietly. "Is that pity I hear, Mrs. Briarwood?" Edmund tried for lightness, but the words came out wrong, defensive, sharp. He winced at his own tone. "No." Her answer was firm, immediate, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "Recognition. Loneliness doesn't discriminate by class, Your Grace. You can be lonely in a ballroom full of people, or in a railway station corner with no one at all. Sometimes I think the loneliness is worse when you're surrounded by others who only see what you can give them, not who you are." Edmund looked at her sharply, startled by her perception. "You speak from experience." Catherine hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Then she seemed to make a decision, her shoulders straightening slightly. "My family." She stopped, started again. "My family was, well-positioned socially, not titled, but wealthy, connected. My father made his fortune in shipping, invested wisely. We had a townhouse in London, a country estate in Kent. I was educated by governesses, presented at court, invited to all the right parties." Edmund hadn't expected this. He'd assumed foolishly. He now realized that Catherine had always lived in poverty, that she'd been born to this life of mended dresses and chipped teacups. "When I chose Thomas," Catherine continued, her voice steady but soft, "they gave me an ultimatum, him or them. My father said no daughter of his would throw herself away on a clerk with no prospects, that if I persisted in this foolishness, I would be dead to them." She smiled, but it was bittersweet, tinged with old pain. "I chose Thomas. I walked out of our house with nothing but the clothes I wore and the small amount of money I'd saved from birthday gifts over the years." "And you never regretted it?" Edmund asked. "Never. Not once, even when times were hardest. Even when we were eating bread and tea for dinner because it was all we could afford. Even after Thomas died, and I had to take in sewing just to keep a roof over Lily's head." Her expression softened with memory. "But I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss my mother sometimes. She was kind, kinder than my father. I think she would have forgiven me, in time, if he'd allowed it. Or my—" She stopped abruptly, her jaw tightening. "Or your," Edmund prompted gently, leaning forward slightly. "My sister." Catherine's voice went flat, carefully neutral in a way that suggested significant emotion being controlled. "But that's ancient history. What matters is that I learned something important through all of it. The people who love you for what you provide, money, status, connections, advantage, will leave when the provision stops. They'll abandon you the moment you can't give them what they want. But the people who love you for who you are, for your character and your heart. Stay, even when there's nothing to gain, even when staying is hard. The parallel to his own experience was so sharp it felt like a blade. Perhaps it was Catherine's honesty that broke something open in Edmund. Perhaps it was the dimming light that made confession easier, shadows forgiving what daylight would judge. Perhaps Edmund had simply been alone with his pain for too long, and it needed release before it poisoned him completely. "I was engaged," he said. The words felt rusty, unpracticed. He hadn't spoken of it aloud to anyone. 6 months, I thought. I believed we had something real, something beyond social advantage or strategic alliance. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. I was naive. "What happened?" Catherine asked softly, her attention completely focused on him. She found someone better, more influential, wealthier, 20 years her senior, and with direct connections to the Prime Minister himself. Edmund's hands tightened on his cup, the china protesting faintly. "She sent me a letter, wouldn't even face me to end it properly. Just a letter, delivered by her maid, explaining that affection alone couldn't sustain the life she required, that she'd found security that transcended sentiment." "I'm sorry," Catherine said, and her empathy felt genuine, not performative. Not the careful social sympathy he'd encountered from the few friends who'd reached out after the broken engagement. That's a particular kind of betrayal, not just losing someone, but questioning whether you ever really had them at all. Whether any of it was real. "Exactly." Edmund looked up at her, surprised by her precise understanding. "Everyone tells me I should be angry, that I should take satisfaction in being well rid of her, that I've dodged a bullet. But mostly I just feel hollow, as if she took not just herself when she left, but my ability to trust in anything good. My ability to believe that genuine affection exists, that authentic connection is possible." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then, "My sister did something similar. Not romantically, we weren't in love, obviously." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "But she made me believe she valued our bond, our family connection, over social considerations. We were close as children, or so I thought. She was older, more sophisticated. I looked up to her. Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. When I chose Thomas, when I told her I was going to marry him regardless of father's disapproval, she was the cruelest of all of them. She called me foolish, selfish, said I was throwing away my future on a man who couldn't give me the life I deserved. As if love were a transaction, as if the measure of a life well lived was the size of one's bank account or the grandness of one's address. Before Edmund could respond, before he could ask the question forming in his mind about Catherine's sister, about whether they'd reconciled, about whether she'd ever regretted her cruelty, Lily appeared, dragging the Walsh children with her. Martin and Annie looked half asleep but game for whatever Lily had planned. "Mama, Mr. Edmund," Lily's voice, though quieter than before out of respect for the lateness of the hour, still carried bright enthusiasm. "We want to sing carols, but Mrs. Davies says we need more grown-ups or it will sound too thin and sad. Will you sing with us?" Catherine glanced at Edmund, amusement dancing in her eyes, the heavy emotion of their conversation lifting slightly. "Can you carry a tune, Your Grace?" "Tolerably," Edmund said, rising and offering Catherine his hand to help her up. She took it without hesitation, and for a moment their hands remained clasped longer than strictly necessary, warm even through the barrier of his glove and her work-roughened skin. The ragtag group gathered around the small tree, Lily, the Walsh children, Mrs. Davies returning from the platform, even Mr. Chester stopping by again on his rounds. Someone started, "Silent Night, Mrs. Davies," her clear voice leading them through the German first, then the English translation. The voices were untrained, imperfect, some off-key, but sincere in a way that professional carolers could never quite achieve. Edmund found himself singing, really singing, for the first time since childhood. Not the dutiful hymns in church or the obligatory carols at society functions, but genuine song, voice lifted without self-consciousness or concern for how he sounded. He glanced at Catherine. She was watching Lily, her expression so full of love it almost hurt to witness pure, uncomplicated maternal devotion. This is what Victoria never understood, Edmund realized with sudden clarity. The difference between possessing something and cherishing it, between having and loving. When the carol ended, Lily tugged Edmund's coat with insistent small fingers. "You have a nice voice, Mr. Edmund. Papa had a nice voice too. He used to sing to me before bed, every night. even when he was tired from working. What did he sing? Edmund asked, crouching down to her level, their faces nearly even. All through the night. It's a lullaby. Mama says it's Welsh, from where Papa's grandmother came from. I know that one, Edmund said, something warm unfurling in his chest. My mother sang it to me when I was small, before she died, before he was sent to boarding school, before his childhood ended. I haven't thought of it in years. Lily brightened considerably. Will you sing it, please? The other children are getting sleepy, and it would be such a nice present, better than anything you could buy. Edmund looked to Catherine, who nodded permission, though her eyes glistened suspiciously in the candlelight. He began to sing softly, the Welsh lullaby his mother had loved. His voice was unpracticed but true, the melody coming back to him across decades with surprising ease. Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee, all through the night. Guardian angels' watch will keep thee, all through the night. Soft, the drowsy hours are creeping, hill and vale in slumber sleeping, I my loving vigil keeping, all through the night. Around him, the station seemed to grow quieter, as if even the travellers paused in their hurrying to listen. Lily leaned against her mother, her small body going slack with contentment, the Walsh children curled up on the blanket, their eyes drooping. Even Mrs. Davies closed her eyes, swaying slightly to the rhythm. When Edmund finished, there was a moment of perfect silence, sacred somehow. That was beautiful, Catherine whispered, her voice thick. Thank you. Thomas would have. He would have liked you, I think. Edmund realized, with a jolt of surprise, that he felt something other than numbness. It wasn't happiness, not yet, too fragile and new for that name, but it was warmth, connection, the smallest stirring of hope that perhaps, he might someday feel whole again. As the children drowsed and the adults spoke in hushed voices, Catherine continued her earlier story, her voice low enough that only Edmund could hear over Lily's soft breathing. My sister's name is Victoria, she said quietly, almost reluctantly, as if speaking the name cost her something. Victoria Hawke. Though I suppose she's Lady Pemberton now. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she married Lord Pemberton just 2 months ago. Quite the social triumph, apparently. Everything she ever wanted. The bitterness in her tone was uncharacteristic, jarring against the gentleness she'd shown all evening. Edmund went absolutely still. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, reality shifting into an impossible configuration. The candle flames wavered, or perhaps that was his vision blurring. What did you say? His voice was barely a whisper, harsh with shock. Catherine looked at him, confusion replacing her bitterness as she registered his reaction. My sister, Victoria. Why? What? She stopped, really seeing his expression now, the color draining from his face. Edmund, you're white as a sheet. What is it? What's wrong? He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. His mind refused to process what she'd just said, even as the terrible logic of it clicked into place with brutal clarity. The woman who had destroyed Catherine's life, who had called her foolish for choosing love, who had cut her off without mercy, was the same woman who had shattered his heart, who had calculated his worth and found it insufficient. Victoria Hawke, now Victoria, Lady Pemberton, was both their betrayer. The coincidence was impossible, absurd, the kind of plot device no novelist would dare use for fear of straining credibility. Yet, it was undeniably, impossibly real. Edmund? Catherine's hand was on his arm now, concern replacing confusion, her fingers tight even through his coat sleeve. What's wrong? Please, talk to me. Victoria Hawke, he managed, forcing the words past the constriction in his throat. Lady Victoria Hawke. She's the woman who... He couldn't finish, couldn't say the words. Catherine's eyes widened as understanding dawned, horror and disbelief warring in her expression. Her hand flew to her mouth. No, that's not it, can't be. She stood abruptly, her movement sharp and uncoordinated. Edmund, was she your fiancé? Victoria was your fiancé? He nodded mutely, unable to trust his voice. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, two people connected by the most unlikely, most painful thread imaginable, mutual betrayal by the same woman. I can't. Catherine's agitation was clear in every line of her body, her usual composure cracking. This is too much of a coincidence. It's impossible. There must be some mistake. Yet here we are, Edmund said quietly, finding his voice at last. Here we are. Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring something indistinct. Catherine automatically stroked her daughter's hair, the gesture instinctive even in her shock, but her eyes remained fixed on Edmund with an intensity that felt almost physical. "We need to talk," she said finally, her voice shaking slightly. "Properly, not here, not now, with Lily sleeping and people around," and she took a shaky breath, visibly trying to compose herself. "Tomorrow, Christmas morning. Would you come to our flat? It's not much, barely 2 rooms, but we can speak freely there. I need to understand." "Yes," Edmund interrupted. "Yes, I'll be there. Whatever address you give me, I'll be there." Catherine nodded jerkily, already reaching into her small reticule for a scrap of paper and a stub of pencil. Her hands trembled as she wrote. Chapter 5. Christmas Morning Unveiled. Edmund stood outside the address Catherine had written for him in the flickering candlelight of the railway station. The building was modest, 3 stories of weathered brick in a working-class neighborhood that spoke of respectability straining against poverty. The street was clean, the doorsteps swept, but the structures showed their age. Cracked mortar, faded paint, windows that likely let in drafts come winter. This was a world away from his Mayfair townhouse, from his country estate with its manicured grounds and gleaming marble. He dressed more simply today, consciously choosing older clothes from the back of his wardrobe, a plain dark coat, simpler waistcoat, no ostentatious jewelry beyond his signet ring, which he couldn't quite bring himself to remove. He didn't want to emphasize the vast gulf between their circumstances, didn't want Catherine to feel the weight of his wealth pressing down on her small space like a judgment. He knocked. Light footsteps approached, and then Catherine opened the door. For a moment they simply looked at each other, 2 people who had shared profound revelations 12 hours ago in the shadowy corner of a railway station and were now facing the bright reality of what those revelations meant. She'd changed from her grey dress into a simple brown one, equally worn but clean. Her hair was still pulled back in that practical bun, though a few rebellious wisps framed her face. She looked tired, as if she'd slept poorly. "Come in," she said quietly. "Lily's playing in her room. We have time to talk before she realizes you're here." The flat was small. Edmund took it in with a glance that he tried to make subtle rather than assessing. 2 rooms beyond this tiny entrance, perhaps, and a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in. But it was scrupulously clean, with touches that spoke of care transcending poverty. A jar of holly on the windowsill catching the morning light, embroidered cushions on worn furniture that had been mended multiple times, a rag rug in cheerful colors that showed careful repair work. Everything was humble but loved, tended with the kind of attention that turned a space into a home. "Tea," Catherine offered, her voice slightly strained. "Please." They moved through the small kitchen in an awkward dance, both hyper-aware of the weighted conversation ahead. Edmund felt absurdly large in the cramped space, his shoulders too broad, his movements too likely to knock something over. Catherine filled a kettle from a pitcher of water, set it on a small spirit stove to heat. She reached for cups, plain white porcelain, mismatched, one with a hairline crack carefully glued, and set them on a wooden tray with hands that trembled slightly. When the tea was ready, they sat at a small wooden table that likely served as Catherine's dining table, sewing, workspace, and general surface for daily life. Morning light streamed through thin curtains, highlighting every worn surface but also illuminating the care taken with what little she had. From the other room came the soft sound of Lily's voice, singing to herself as she played. Catherine wrapped her hands around her cup, staring into the dark liquid as if gathering her thoughts. Finally, she began to speak. "Victoria is 4 years older than me. Growing up, She paused, then continued with visible effort. I worshipped her. She was everything I wasn't, beautiful in that classical way everyone admires, accomplished at all the things that mattered to society. She could play the pianoforte beautifully, sing like an angel, dance with perfect grace. She was everything our parents wanted in a daughter. Edmund listened without interrupting, beginning to understand the woman who had hurt them both through the eyes of someone who'd known her longest. I was the plain one, Catherine continued, a sad smile touching her lips. The bookish one, who preferred gardening to balls, who'd rather read about ancient Rome than practice my watercolors. Victoria was kind to me, in her way. She'd include me in things, teach me to style my hair properly, help me choose dresses for parties. But even as children, I could see her calculating which girls were worth befriending, whose families had the most influence. She didn't do it cruelly, it was just how she saw the world. Like a chessboard, where every piece had strategic value. Edmund recognized the Victoria Catherine described, could see glimpses of the woman he'd known, or thought he'd known. When I turned 18, I met Thomas at a garden party at the Wiltshire estate. He was there as a clerk, helping manage the arrangements for the event. Catherine's expression softened with memory, grief, and love mingling in her eyes. We talked about roses. He knew varieties I'd never heard of. He'd studied botany before. Financial necessity forced him into clerical work. He was kind, intelligent, curious about the world in a way that had nothing to do with social advantage. She took a sip of tea, gathering herself. We began seeing each other secretly, meeting in the park, exchanging letters. I knew my family would never approve. He had no fortune, no connections, no prospects beyond a modest clerk's salary. When Victoria discovered us, she found one of his letters. I thought, foolishly, that she might help, that she might understand, might plead my case to our parents. We were sisters, after all. She didn't, Edmund said quietly, though it wasn't really a question. No. She went immediately to our parents, gave them an ultimatum. Forbid the match or face social embarrassment when their daughter threw herself away on a nobody. Catherine's voice grew harder. When I refused to give Thomas up, when we married anyway at a small church with only his family present, Victoria was the one who convinced our parents to cut me off completely. She orchestrated the whole thing, wrote the letter, disowning me that my father signed, ensured all our mutual acquaintances knew I was no longer to be acknowledged. Edmund felt anger rising in his chest on Catherine's behalf. She visited me once after the wedding, Catherine continued, came to the modest rooms Thomas and I had rented. She looked around at our small space with such pity, and then she told me I'd made the greatest mistake of my life. That love without security was a fantasy that would destroy me, that I'd wake up one day poor and bitter and resenting Thomas for it. She said I was selfish for choosing my own happiness over family duty, over the advantageous match they'd been arranging for me with a baronet's son. And then she did exactly the same thing she condemned you for, Edmund said, bitterness creeping into his voice. She chose her own advantage over genuine connection. She just dressed it up differently. But she dressed it up as duty, as practical wisdom, as protecting herself from the mistakes she saw others make. Catherine looked directly at Edmund. Edmund, you need to understand something. Victoria isn't cruel for cruelty's sake. She genuinely believes that love is a luxury, that security and status are the only things that matter. Our mother raised her that way. Mother had been disinherited by her own family for marrying someone they considered beneath her, and she spent her entire life regretting it, resenting my father, even though he'd given her wealth and position. She raised Victoria to never make the same mistake. Edmund found himself sharing everything in return, not just the bare facts he'd mentioned the night before, but the emotions that had nearly destroyed him. How Victoria had seemed different with him, warmer, more genuine than the calculating woman Catherine described. The small moments that had made him believe, the way she'd laughed at his jokes, really laughed as if delighted, rather than performing social nicety. Her apparent interest in his estate improvements, asking intelligent questions about drainage and crop rotation, her enthusiasm for their future together, or what he'd interpreted as enthusiasm. I proposed in May, in the rose garden at Ashford Estate, she accepted. Edmund's hands tightened around his cup, the porcelain warm against his palms. We were planning an autumn wedding. I was happy, genuinely happy for the first time since my mother died when I was 12. He took a breath. Then Lord Pemberton's wife died in July, a sudden illness, very tragic, and suddenly Victoria became distant. She was always too busy to visit, always had another engagement, another prior commitment. In September, I received her letter. He'd read it so many times he could recite it from memory, each word seared into his mind. You must understand, Edmund, that affection alone cannot sustain a life of the quality I require. Lord Pemberton can offer me security that transcends sentiment. I hope you'll come to see this as I do. A practical decision that saves us both from eventual disappointment. As if love were inevitable disappointment, Catherine said softly. As if genuine affection was a childish dream we'd both grow out of. She returned my ring by post, my grandmother's sapphire ring. Edmund's voice went flat with remembered shock. By the time I could travel to London to confront her, I was at my estate. When the letter arrived, she'd already accepted Pemberton. The engagement was announced in the Times the very next day. I was a complete fool. No, Catherine said firmly, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. "You were trusting. That's not the same thing. You believed someone you loved was being honest with you. That's not foolishness, Edmund. That's faith. It's just that your faith was misplaced." They sat in silence for a moment, two people connected by the unique pain of being betrayed by the same person in different ways. Then Catherine sighed, a sound full of complicated emotions. "I should hate her," she said quietly. "Sometimes I do. I lie awake at night and imagine confronting her, telling her exactly what her cruelty cost me and Lily. But Edmund, she's also my sister, the girl who taught me to braid my hair when I was 5, who read to me when I was sick with scarlet fever and everyone thought I might die, who wasn't always calculating and cold." Catherine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Our father was obsessed with social position. It consumed him, defined every decision he made. And our mother, as I said, had been disinherited by her family for what they considered a poor match. She never forgave herself for it, never let us forget the lesson. They raised Victoria to believe that security was everything, that love was a trap that destroyed women's futures, that we had to protect ourselves because no one else would." Edmund considered this, turning it over in his mind. "You had the same upbringing. You made a different choice. I had Thomas, someone who showed me what genuine love looked like, who proved that affection and security weren't mutually exclusive." Catherine's smile was sad. Victoria never had that. Every suitor she's ever had wanted her for her beauty, or her connections, or her dowry. No one has ever wanted her for herself, or if they did, she couldn't see it past the conditioning of our childhood. "Are you defending her?" Edmund asked, not accusingly, but genuinely curious about how Catherine could maintain such nuance about someone who'd hurt her so deeply. "No. What she did to both of us was wrong. The cruelty of cutting me off, the callousness of breaking your heart, those were choices she made, and she's responsible for them." Catherine met his eyes directly. "But I'm trying to understand her. There's a difference. If I spend my life hating Victoria, if you spend yours hating her, she wins. She takes up space in our hearts that could hold something better, something truer." Edmund realized Catherine was right, but more than that, he realized something else that struck him with the force of revelation. "You've done the work to heal from this. I haven't. That's why you can see nuance where I only see betrayal. That's why you can speak of her with sadness instead of just bitterness." "It took time," Catherine said. 2 years since Thomas died, 3 since Victoria cut me off. And it wasn't linear. I didn't just steadily improve. Some days I still rage at her. Some days I grieve not just Thomas, but the sister I thought I had, the family I thought would always be there." "Mama, is Mr. Edmund here?" Lily's voice called from the other room, bright with hope. "I want to show him my Christmas present." The tension broke like a soap bubble. Catherine and Edmund shared a small, complicit smile, the relief of being rescued from heavy emotion by childhood enthusiasm. A moment later, Lily burst through the doorway, clutching a cloth doll with obvious pride. "Look, Mama made her. Her name is Rose, and she has a dress just like mine." The doll was beautifully crafted, clearly the work of skilled hands, cloth body, embroidered features, a tiny dress in the same brown fabric as Lily's, complete with miniature buttons. Edmund examined the doll with appropriate seriousness, taking it gently from Lily's hands. "She's beautiful, Lily. Your mother is very talented." "Mama can make anything," Lily said with absolute certainty. "Last year she made me a whole puppet theatre from a wooden crate Mr. Chester gave her. We did shows for the people at the station, St. George and the Dragon, and Cinderella, and stories Mama made up herself." She looked between Edmund and her mother with the uncomplicated directness of children. "Are you and Mama friends now? Real friends?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that both adults paused, suddenly aware of what they were building between them. "I'd like to be," Edmund said, looking at Catherine rather than Lily. "If your mother will have me." "Of course," Catherine said softly, holding his gaze. "Real friends." Lily beamed, her whole face lighting up. "Good, because Mama needs more friends. She's always taking care of everyone else. Mrs. Davies and the Fletchers and the Walsh children and everyone at the station. Someone should take care of her sometimes." Out of the mouths of babes, Edmund thought, watching Catherine flush slightly at her daughter's assessment, as Lily chatted about her doll, showing Edmund the careful stitching where the arms attached, the tiny embroidered flowers on the dress hem. Edmund watched Catherine, really watched her, seeing what he'd missed in the dim light of the station. She wasn't healed because nothing had hurt her. She was healed because she'd done the hard work of processing her pain, of not letting it define her, of choosing actively, daily to move forward with purpose. She'd lost a sister and a husband. She raised a daughter alone, in poverty, with no family support and no prospect of her circumstances improving. And yet she spent her Christmas Eve at a railway station, offering warmth and community to other lonely souls. She made elaborate puppet theatres from discarded crates. She sewed dolls with painstaking care. She gave, constantly, from a well that should have run dry. She didn't just survive. She lived, she gave, she loved. That's what he'd been missing these past 3 months. Not just time to heal, but purpose in the healing, a reason to move forward that transcended his own pain. Catherine caught him staring, colour rising in her cheeks. "What are you thinking?" "That I have a great deal to learn from you," Edmund said honestly. As the morning sun strengthened, streaming through the thin curtains and illuminating dust motes in the air, Edmund felt something shift inside him. Not healing, not yet. Too soon for that. But possibility. The sense that perhaps the path forward existed, even if he couldn't yet see where it led. Catherine poured more tea. Lily settled at their feet with her doll, creating an elaborate story about Rose's adventures, and Edmund thought, maybe being lost was necessary. Maybe you have to be lost before you can be found. Maybe the breaking makes space for something new. Chapter 6. Parallel Wounds, Different Paths. After Lily settled with her doll and a picture book about woodland creatures, curling up in a patch of sunlight near the window with Rose clutched against her chest, Catherine and Edmund returned to their conversation. But something had shifted. The revelation was behind them now, the shock absorbed, the impossible coincidence accepted as fact. Now they were exploring what it meant, this strange connection forged through mutual betrayal. "The strangest thing," Edmund said, cradling his third cup of tea, "is that I'm not angry with you. I thought I might be some irrational extension of my feelings about Victoria onto her family, but if anything, I feel less alone. Someone else understands exactly what she did, what it cost." "I feel the same," Catherine admitted, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup in a gesture Edmund was beginning to recognize as habit when she was thinking deeply. "Though I confess, when I first realized who you were last night at the station, my immediate thought was horror. What if you blamed me somehow? Family blame? Transferred? What if you saw Victoria's cruelty in me simply because we share blood?" "That's irrational," Edmund said gently. "Grief is irrational." Catherine's smile was rueful, self-aware. "You're not responsible for Victoria's choices any more than I am. But knowing that intellectually and feeling it emotionally are very different things." Edmund considered this, recognizing the truth in it. "How did you move past it? The anger, the sense of betrayal? Because I feel like I'm drowning in it, and you seem not untouched, but able to breathe despite it." "Who says I've fully moved past it?" Catherine countered gently, her brown eyes meeting his with complete honesty. "Some days it still rises up like a wave, usually when I'm struggling to make rent, or when Lily asks why she doesn't have grandparents like other children, why no one from my old life ever visits. But I've learned to acknowledge the feeling without letting it control me, to feel it, sit with it, and then let it pass." "How?" Edmund leaned forward, genuinely seeking wisdom. This woman, who had every reason to be as bitter as he was, somehow wasn't. He needed to understand. Work, purpose, love. Catherine counted on her fingers. "I pour my anger into my sewing. Some of my best, most intricate pieces were made when I was furious. Every perfect stitch was a small act of defiance against the idea that I'd been ruined by my choices. I remind myself that living well, raising Lily to be kind and joyful despite our poverty, is the best response to Victoria's belief that only status matters. That, where proof, love and character mean more than social position." She paused, her expression growing more somber. "And I let myself grieve, not just Thomas, but the sister I thought I had, the family I thought would always be there, the future I'd imagined. You can't heal what you won't mourn, Edmund. The wound has to be acknowledged before it can close." "I've been doing the opposite," Edmund admitted, the words coming more easily now. "I've been wallowing, withdrawing. I've neglected my estate, my tenants, my responsibilities. I told myself it didn't matter, that nothing mattered if it couldn't protect me from being hurt. If love was a lie and duty meant nothing, why bother with any of it?" "That's understandable," Catherine said, and her lack of judgment made it easier to continue. Immediately after Thomas died, I could barely function. I'd sit by the window for hours, just staring at nothing. If not for Lily needing me, needing to be fed and dressed and held, I might have stayed in that place indefinitely. But I don't have a Lily, Edmund said quietly. I don't have anyone depending on me. Or rather, he stopped, struck by a realization that felt like a physical blow. I do. I have hundreds of tenants whose livelihoods depend on estate management I've been ignoring. I have servants whose positions depend on my engagement. I have a seat in Parliament that's been empty for months while important votes happen without me. I've been so focused on my own pain that I've ignored my duty to everyone else. Catherine reached across the small table, touching his hand briefly, a gesture of comfort. Nothing more, but Edmund felt it like warmth spreading through cold limbs. You're realizing it now. That's what matters. Is it? Edmund challenged. Not her, but himself. What if I've caused irreparable harm through my negligence? What if tenants have lost crops, servants have lost positions, important legislation has passed that I should have opposed? Then you address it. You make amends where you can. You move forward. Catherine's voice was firm but kind, the tone of someone who'd learned wisdom through suffering. Edmund, you can't undo the past 3 months. They're gone, immutable. You can only choose what you do with the next 3 months, and the 3 after that, and all the ones that follow. How are you so wise? Edmund asked, half joking to lighten the weight of the conversation, half serious because he genuinely wanted to know. Necessity, Catherine said with a wry smile. I couldn't afford not to be. Bitterness is a luxury for people with resources. I had to choose, become wise or become broken. For Lily's sake, I chose wisdom. Mama, Lily's voice called from her sunny spot. Can we go to the park? It's snowing. Please, please, please. Edmund glanced toward the window. Indeed, fat white flakes had begun falling, transforming the grey neighborhood into something softer, cleaner. Catherine glanced at Edmund uncertainly. I don't want to monopolize your Christmas day, Your Grace. You've already been here for hours, and surely you have other obligations. Edmund, he interrupted, perhaps more forcefully than intended. Please, Catherine. And I'd like to come, if I may. I can't remember the last time I walked in fresh snow just for the pleasure of it, without purpose or destination, just walking. Something in Catherine's expression softened. Then we'd be glad of your company. The 3 of them ventured out into the neighborhood, Lily practically vibrating with excitement as she bundled into her coat and those mismatched mittens. The world outside was transforming snow, covering the worn cobblestones, dusting the laundry that still hung on lines despite the holiday, softening every harsh edge. It was a world away from Edmund's estate, with its manicured grounds and sweeping vistas. Here, the streets were narrow, the buildings modest and close together, laundry hung frozen on lines strung between windows. Children's voices echoed off brick walls. But there was life here, genuine community. Neighbors called Christmas greetings from doorways. Children threw snowballs with wild abandon. Someone's voice drifted from an open window, singing a carol slightly off-key but with great enthusiasm. Lily ran ahead, then back, then ahead again, her energy seemingly boundless. She made snow angels with more enthusiasm than skill, her technique resulting in lopsided impressions that she declared perfect. She tried to catch snowflakes on her tongue, laughing when they melted instantly. She insisted Edmund and Catherine help her build a snowman outside their building, recruiting them with the authority of a general commanding troops. He needs a proper hat, Lily declared, surveying their half-built creation. And a carrot nose. But we don't have a carrot. A potato nose, then, Catherine suggested. Practical as always. He'll be a very practical snowman, the kind who manages household budgets. Edmund surprised himself by laughing, a real, full laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest. When was the last time he'd laughed like that? Before Victoria's letter? Certainly. Perhaps not since childhood. As Lily played, running between buildings to gather more snow, Edmund and Catherine stood together, ostensibly supervising but really just being present. 2 adults, sharing space and silence, watching a child's joy with the complicated mixture of affection and melancholy that children always inspired. What was Thomas like? Edmund asked quietly. If you don't mind speaking of him. Catherine's smile was immediate and genuine, grief and love mingling in her expression. Kind. So deeply, fundamentally kind. He noticed things if someone was struggling, if someone needed help. He'd give his last shilling to someone who needed it more, which drove me absolutely mad sometimes when we were struggling ourselves, and he'd come home with empty pockets because he'd met someone hungrier than we were. She laughed softly, the sound bittersweet. But that was who he was. He couldn't walk past suffering without trying to ease it. He'd stop to help elderly people carry parcels, always knew the names of every beggar on our street, brought home stray cats until our landlady forbade it. "You loved him very much," Edmund said. "It wasn't a question." "I did. I do." Catherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Loving someone doesn't stop just because they're gone. The love has nowhere to go, so it stays here." She touched her chest, over her heart. "Lily said something similar to you, didn't she? About love needing somewhere to go." "She did," Edmund confirmed. "She's remarkably perceptive for 7. She's had to be." Catherine watched her daughter, who was now trying to make a snow fort with limited success. "I worry sometimes that she's missed out on childhood because we've had so little. No toys except what I can make, no sweets except on special occasions, no pretty dresses or holidays or any of the things children should have." She paused, her expression thoughtful. "But then I see her joy, her generosity with what little she has, her absolute delight in simple things like snow and stories, and that doll I made her. And I think maybe she's gained something too. Perspective, empathy, the knowledge that happiness doesn't come from possessions, but from how we choose to see the world." Edmund felt the implicit contrast to his own upbringing, materially abundant, but emotionally barren. "My parents had everything money could buy, the finest estate, the best education, servants, for every possible need. And they were miserable. Separately miserable, barely speaking to each other, united only in their determination to elevate our family's status even higher." He'd never said this aloud before. Never admitted it even to himself, really. "I think that's why I fell for Victoria. She seemed different, warmer, present in a way my mother never was. But perhaps I just wanted so desperately to believe someone could love me for myself, not my title, that I saw what I wanted to see rather than what was actually there." "Perhaps someone can," Catherine said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of children's laughter from nearby streets. Their eyes met, held. Something passed between them. Recognition, attraction, possibility. Lily's snowball hit Edmund's shoulder, breaking the moment with perfect comedic timing. "Mr. Edmund, you're not paying attention. The snowman needs arms, and you promised to help." As they finished, the snowman arms made of broken broom handles that Catherine produced from somewhere, eyes of coal, a potato nose and a ridiculous striped scarf that Lily insisted he wear, because snowmen get cold too. Edmund realized something startling. He was attracted to Catherine, not just intellectually, not just as a fellow survivor of Victoria's calculated cruelty, but genuinely, physically attracted in a way that had nothing to do with social suitability or strategic advantage. It wasn't the calculated desire he'd felt for Victoria, that sense of, this is an appropriate match between eligible parties. It was something warmer, more real, more frightening. The way Catherine's eyes crinkled when she smiled at Lily's antics, the competence in her hands as she adjusted her daughter's scarf with practiced tenderness, the strength in her voice when she spoke of her principles, the grace with which she carried poverty like a mantle rather than a burden. She was beautiful, Edmund realized. Not in the classical way Victoria was beautiful, no perfect features carefully maintained, no fashionable dress, no artfully arranged hair, but beautiful in the way that mattered, from the inside out. Character made visible, and terrifyingly, he thought she might feel the same way. He caught her looking at him when she thought he was focused on Lily, noticed the faint flush on her cheeks when their hands brushed accidentally while building the snowman, the way she smiled at him open, without the guardedness she showed others. But he couldn't act on it. Not yet. Catherine was right. He needed to heal first. He needed to become someone worthy of her strength, her grace, her hard-won wisdom. Someone who'd done his own work, instead of expecting her to fix him. He needed to stop running from Victoria's shadow and start walking toward his own light. As they walked back toward Catherine's building, Lily between them holding both their hands and chattering about the brave winter ducks, Catherine spoke quietly enough that only Edmund could hear. "Edmund, I need to say something." His heart clenched. Here it came, the gentle rejection, the acknowledgement that a duke and a seamstress, no matter how they felt, existed in worlds too different to bridge. "I care about you," Catherine said, her voice steady but soft. "More than is probably wise, given we've known each other less than a day. But I also recognize that you're still healing, that we both are, in our own ways. And I have Lily to think about. I can't bring someone into her life who might leave." "Of course," Edmund managed, trying to keep disappointment from bleeding into his voice. "I'm not saying no," Catherine continued, and Edmund's heart lifted slightly. "I'm saying, not yet, not rushed. If there's something real here, it will still be real in a month, in 6 months. But if we rush it, if we use each other as bandages for wounds that need proper healing, we'll only hurt each other. And I can't." Her voice cracked slightly, the first break in her composure. "I can't survive another heartbreak. Not when I'm already holding myself together with thread and determination." Edmund stopped walking, gently extracting his hand from Lily's and turning to face Catherine fully. "You're right. You're absolutely right. And I respect that more than I can say. I respect you more than I can say. But friends?" Catherine asked hopefully, her brown eyes searching his. "Real friends, like Lily said." "Friends," Edmund agreed, the word feeling both insufficient and exactly right. For now. As they reached Catherine's building, their ridiculous snowman standing guard outside, Lily tugged Edmund's hand with determination. "Will you come back tomorrow? We could go feed the ducks at the park. They're still there in winter. Mama says they're the brave ones who don't fly south." Edmund knelt to Lily's level, meeting her bright blue eyes directly. "I'll come back, I promise." And he meant it with every fiber of his being. Chapter 7. New Beginnings, Old Responsibilities. Edmund returned to Ashford Estate late on Christmas Day, the carriage wheels crunching over gravel as the grand house emerged from the winter darkness. Gas lamps illuminated the facade, 3 stories of honey-colored stone, classical columns flanking the entrance, windows that reflected light without warmth. It had always been imposing, designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. His grandfather had rebuilt it in the last century, determined to announce the Ashford family's importance to anyone who approached. But for the first time in months, Edmund saw it not as a monument to his failure, the grand estate that hadn't been enough to keep Victoria, but as a responsibility he'd neglected. Hundreds of people depended on this place, on him, for their livelihoods, and he'd abandoned them to nurse his wounded pride. Inside, his butler Harrison waited in the entrance hall, his elderly face carefully composed but unable to hide the relief that flickered across his features. "Your Grace, welcome home, may I say. Harrison, I need to see Pemberton first thing tomorrow morning." Edmund handed over his coat, noting the slight tremor in his own hands. His estate steward, not Lord Pemberton. He had to stop flinching at the name. "And I want a full account of all estate matters I've neglected these past 3 months. Everything. Don't soften it." Harrison's expression shifted from relief to something that looked remarkably like hope. "Of course, Your Grace. Shall I inform the staff that you'll be taking dinner in the dining room this evening?" Edmund paused, thinking of Catherine's small table, the warmth of simple shared meals in cramped quarters, the way breaking bread together created intimacy that grand dining rooms could never achieve. "No, I'll take it in the kitchen, with the staff. It's still Christmas, after all." Harrison blinked, clearly shocked. In all his years of service, no Duke of Ashford had ever taken a meal in the servants' quarters. "Your Grace?" "If they're comfortable with it," Edmund clarified, suddenly uncertain. "I realize I've been absent, worse than absent. I'd like to be present now, to know the people who keep this household running." The dinner was awkward at first, servants unsure how to behave with their Duke sitting at the scarred wooden table where they normally ate their own meals. The cook, Mrs. Bennet, nearly dropped the serving dish when Edmund asked her to sit and join them. The footman stood rigidly until Edmund explicitly invited them to sit as well. But gradually, tentatively, conversation emerged. Edmund learned names he should have known years ago. Harrison's daughter was engaged to a shopkeeper in the village. Mrs. Bennet's son had joined the Navy. The junior footman, James, sent most of his wages home to his widowed mother in Cornwall. These were people, not furniture. How had he never truly seen them before? It was humbling and necessary. The next morning, Pemberton arrived at Edmund's study with an armload of ledgers, his weathered face grave with the expression of a man about to deliver bad news to someone who wouldn't want to hear it. He spread the ledgers across Edmund's mahogany desk, the pages covered in neat columns of figures that told a story of increasing neglect. "Your Grace, I won't soften this," Pemberton began, his voice steady but strained. The south fields have significant flooding due to neglected drainage systems. The channels should have been cleared in October. We've lost the entire winter wheat crop, approximately 300 acres. 3 tenant families are threatening to break their leases and seek land elsewhere. Edmund felt each item like a physical blow, but he forced himself to listen without interrupting. The roofing on the East Tenant cottages has failed, Pemberton continued. We've had to temporarily relocate 2 families, the Mitchells and the Wainwrights, to storage buildings that are barely adequate. They have small children, Your Grace, and there are outstanding accounts with suppliers who are beginning to question our creditworthiness. The blacksmith, the lumber yard, the feed merchant all owed for months now. This was the cost of his wallowing. Real harm to real people who had depended on him, who had every right to expect their landlord to fulfill his obligations. Children sleeping in damp storage buildings because he'd been too consumed by self-pity to approve roof repairs. How much? Edmund asked quietly, his voice rough. To make immediate repairs, relocate the tenants properly, compensate for crop losses, Pemberton calculated quickly, years of estate management allowing him to tally figures mentally. Approximately £1,200, Your Grace, and that's emergency measures only. Proper long-term solutions, new drainage systems, complete cottage renovations, settling all outstanding accounts will cost significantly more. Do it. All of it. Immediately. Edmund leaned forward, meeting Pemberton's eyes directly. And Pemberton, I owe you an apology. I've been derelict in my duties, and you've been left to manage an impossible situation alone. You've done your best with no support from the person who should have been leading. That changes now. I want daily meetings until we've addressed every concern, and I want to visit the affected tenants personally to apologize. Pemberton stared at him, as if Edmund had grown a second head. Your Grace, dukes don't apologize to. This duke does, Edmund interrupted firmly. I failed in my responsibility to people who depend on me. The least I can do is own it, face them, and commit to doing better. Something shifted in Pemberton's expression, respect, perhaps, or relief that his employer had finally returned from wherever he'd been these past months. Very well, Your Grace. I'll arrange the visits for tomorrow and the day after, and I'll begin authorizing the emergency repairs immediately. As Pemberton gathered his ledgers and departed, Edmund pulled out fresh paper and began writing. Not to Catherine, not yet, though he thought of her constantly, but to himself. A plan, concrete steps forward, ways to be found. 1. Address immediate estate crisis. In progress. 2. Restore tenant trust through action, not words. 3. Return to Parliament, resume duties. 4. Examine estate policies. Are they fair or exploitative? 5. Become someone worthy of Catherine's respect. That last one he underlined twice, pressing the pen so hard it nearly tore through the paper. Edmund spent the next 2 days visiting tenant families, seeing firsthand the consequences of his neglect. Pemberton accompanied him, providing context and history, but Edmund insisted on doing the apologizing himself. The Mitchells, whose cottage roof had collapsed under heavy snow, forcing them and their 4 children into a converted storage building. The space was barely weatherproof, and Mrs. Mitchell's youngest had developed a persistent cough from the dampness. She tried to curtsy despite her obvious exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, speaking of sleepless nights, worrying about her children. Your Grace, we don't mean to complain, but the little ones, you have every right to complain, Edmund interrupted gently, crouching down to the children's level, where they huddled near a wholly inadequate brazier. This should never have happened. I'm deeply sorry. Repairs on your cottage begin tomorrow morning, and in the meantime, you'll be moved to proper accommodation at estate expense. There are empty rooms in the old steward's house, fully furnished, warm, adequate for your family. Mrs. Mitchell's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Your Grace, thank you. The Hadleys, whose fields had flooded when the drainage channels clogged with autumn debris that should have been cleared. They'd lost their entire winter wheat crop, their primary source of income. Mr. Hadley was angry, defensive, a working man who'd been pushed too far. We've been good tenants for 20 years, Your Grace. Never missed a payment, worked the land well, made improvements at our own expense. But we can't pay rent on crops we can't grow. If you're here to evict us. I'm here to apologize, Edmund said. You won't be evicted. Rent is suspended until the drainage is fixed and your fields are viable again. and I'm compensating you for your lost crop's full market value. Mr. Hadley's anger slowly gave way to stunned surprise. That's very generous, Your Grace. It's fair, Edmund corrected. It's what should have been done immediately, in October when Pemberton first reported the problem. This is my failure, Mr. Hadley, not yours. Each visit followed a similar pattern. Edmund listened, really listened to tenant concerns he should have been addressing all along. He apologized without making excuses. He committed to specific actions with specific timelines. Some tenants remained wary, having learned through bitter experience not to trust promises from landlords. Others were openly grateful, their relief palpable. All were surprised by a duke who sat in their modest homes, drank their tea from chipped cups, and treated them like people rather than assets on a ledger. By the end of the second day, Edmund was exhausted physically, emotionally, spiritually drained. But it was the good exhaustion of meaningful work, the tiredness that came from purpose rather than despair. He was beginning to understand what Catherine meant about pouring pain into purpose, about channeling grief into action rather than letting it consume you. On December 30th, Edmund wrote to Catherine. He sat at his desk for hours, working through multiple drafts, crossing out lines that sounded too formal or too familiar or too presumptuous, the wastebasket filled with crumpled false starts. Finally, he produced something that felt honest. Dear Catherine, I promised Lily I would return, and I'm a man who keeps his promises. But I wanted to write first, to explain my absence and to tell you what I've been doing. I've spent these past days addressing the damage I caused through my negligence, visiting tenants I failed, making amends where I can, beginning the long work of becoming someone worthy of the responsibility I've been given. You were right that healing takes work, that it requires purpose beyond our own pain. I'm learning what that means, though I suspect I'm still very much a student in this. May I call on you tomorrow? I'd like to see you both. And, if Lily still wants to feed those brave ducks who don't fly south, I'd be honored to join you. Yours in friendship and gratitude, Edmund. He sealed it quickly before doubt could make him reconsider, dispatched it with a footman who had instructions to wait for a reply. The next morning, New Year's Eve, a response arrived. Edmund, come for breakfast. Lily has been asking about you every day, multiple times a day, in fact. She's made you a drawing of our snowman. She's quite proud of it. I'm glad you're finding your way forward. I'd like to hear about it. Catherine. Edmund read it 3 times, analyzing every word like a scholar examining an ancient text. The warmth in her greeting, the openness of the invitation, the small but significant detail that Lily had been thinking of him, asking about him every day. He arrived at Catherine's flat mid-morning, carrying a basket he'd carefully packed himself, fresh bread from his estate kitchens, homemade jam, real butter, a roasted chicken still warm from the oven, oranges that had cost a small fortune from a merchant who imported them, food that would make their New Year's celebration more abundant. Catherine opened the door, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, two people whose connection had deepened from strangers to something neither quite knew how to name. Her eyes widened at the basket. Edmund, this is too much. It's from my estate, he said quickly, suddenly uncertain. Had he overstepped? Not charity. Just sharing what I have, if you're comfortable accepting it. I thought it's New Year's Eve, and she studied his face, seeming to read something there that satisfied her. Then she nodded, stepping back to let him in. Come in, Lily, Mr. Edmund is here. Lily barreled into him with the force of a small cannonball, nearly knocking him off balance. She thrust a piece of paper at him with the pride of an artist displaying her masterwork. Look, I drew our snowman. See, I made him smiling because that's how I remember him. And that's you, and that's Mama, and that's me. We're all happy because it's Christmas and we're together. Edmund knelt to study it properly, genuinely impressed by the detail. The snowman was surprisingly well rendered for a 7-year-old, coal eyes, stick arms, the absurd striped scarf carefully depicted. 3 figures stood beside it, clearly identifiable. A tall man in dark clothes, a woman in a dress, a small girl with curly hair. This is wonderful, Lily. You're quite the artist. May I keep it? Really? Lily's entire face glowed with delight. You want to keep my drawing? Really? I'll hang it in my study, right where I can see it every day. As they shared breakfast far more abundant than Catherine's usual fare, and Edmund noted her slight discomfort at accepting so much but also her graciousness in doing so, Edmund told them about his week, not in exhaustive detail, but the essence of it, facing his failures, making amends, beginning the long work of restoration of his estate, his relationships, himself. Catherine listened with complete attention, her brown eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she said quietly, "You're not the same man who stood lost by that Christmas tree." "No," Edmund agreed, "thanks to a very wise little girl who asked if I was lost too." Lily beamed with pride. "I knew you'd get found. I told Mama you would. I said, 'Mama, Mr. Edmund won't stay lost. He just needs someone to show him the way.' And I was right." After breakfast, they bundled up against the cold Lily in her mismatched mittens, Catherine in her worn but clean shawl, Edmund in his simpler coat that still marked him as wealthy but at least wasn't ostentatious. The park was a 20-minute walk through streets transformed by recent snow, children playing everywhere, the air filled with laughter, and the distant sound of church bells marking the last day of the year. As they fed the ducks, hardy birds indeed, paddling in water that must have been freezing, Edmund felt something settle in his chest. Peace, not happiness yet, not the uncomplicated joy he saw in Lily's face, but peace, the sense that he was finally moving in the right direction. As Lily chased pigeons with more enthusiasm than success, Catherine turned to Edmund, her expression suddenly serious. "What happens after this week?" she asked quietly. "You have responsibilities, Parliament, your estate, society. Your life is in that world. Mine is here, in this neighborhood, with Lily and our modest routines. How do we reconcile that?" Edmund had been thinking about this very question for days. "I've been asking the wrong question," he said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke. "I've been thinking, how can I fit you into my life? But maybe the question is, what kind of life do I want to build? And the answer involves being present here, there, wherever I'm needed. Not compartmentalized, but integrated." "That sounds idealistic," Catherine said, but her tone was gentle, curious rather than dismissive. "Perhaps, but I've been watching you, Catherine. You're a seamstress, a mother, a community builder, a survivor, probably 20 other things I haven't seen yet. You don't separate those roles, you integrate them. You bring your whole self to everything you do. That's what I want to learn. That's who I want to become." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily play. Then, "You're not just healing, you're transforming. Thanks to you." "No," she corrected firmly, turning to face him fully. "Because of you. I didn't do the work. I just reflected back what was already there. The man capable of this, of apologizing to tenants, of changing his life, of choosing purpose over despair was always inside you, Edmund. You just forgot him for a while." As the sun set on New Year's Eve, painting the winter sky in shades of pink and gold, Edmund walked Catherine and Lily home, through streets growing dark and cold. At her door, Lily hugged him fiercely, her small arms strong around his waist. "Happy New Year, Mr. Edmund. This year will be better, I can tell. It's going to be wonderful." "I believe you're right," Edmund said, meaning it completely. After Lily went inside, Catherine and Edmund stood in the cold twilight. They didn't touch, but they were close enough that Edmund could see the way the dying light caught in her eyes, turning them almost gold. "Friends," she said softly, a statement and a question. "Friends," he agreed, but they both knew it was becoming something more. Chapter 8. Finding the Way Home. 2 weeks had passed since that Christmas Eve encounter in the railway station, and Edmund's life had transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined possible. He'd established a new rhythm, a pattern of days that felt purposeful rather than empty. Each morning began with meetings with Pemberton about estate management, but now these discussions focused on fairness and tenant welfare, not merely profit margins and efficiency. They discussed crop rotation that would replenish soil rather than exhaust it, fair rent calculations that allowed tenants to save for their own futures, repairs and improvements that would make their lives genuinely better rather than merely adequate. Twice weekly, Edmund visited Catherine and Lily, carefully timing his arrivals so as not to presume too much or overwhelm them. Tuesday afternoons and Saturday mornings had become sacred hours, spent in Catherine's modest flat or walking through the neighborhood, Lily chattering between them, Catherine's quiet wisdom balancing his still healing heart. He'd returned to Parliament as well, resuming his seat in the House of Lords, but where before he'd been a largely silent presence, voting as tradition dictated, now he found himself speaking on labor reform issues he'd previously ignored. The conditions of factory workers, the rights of tenant farmers, the need for educational opportunities for working-class children. Some of his peers looked at him strangely, as if he'd become a radical. Perhaps he had. His servants had certainly noticed the change. Edmund overheard Harrison confiding to Mrs. Bennet, the cook, one morning. His Grace is himself again, no, better than himself, more present. He actually asked about my daughter's wedding plans yesterday, knew her name and everything. About time, Mrs. Bennet had replied with the frankness of long service. He's been a ghost in his own house these past months. Good to have him back among the living. Edmund had also begun correspondence with Catherine between his visits, regular letters that arrived at her modest flat with a frequency that would have raised eyebrows in his social circle. Not love letters. Not yet. They weren't there yet, dancing around the growing feelings between them with careful steps. But genuine friendship, honest communication that felt more intimate than any conversation he'd had in his previous life. He shared his thoughts on estate management challenges, asking for her perspective on tenant needs. She shared stories of Lily's antics, the elaborate games she invented, the questions she asked that had no answers, the way she mothered her doll, Rose, with fierce tenderness. Catherine wrote about her sewing commissions, the families at the railway station, her small observations about life that carried unexpected wisdom. One letter from Catherine arrived on January 4th, and Edmund read it 3 times, his heart aching with tenderness and something deeper he wasn't quite ready to name. Dear Edmund, Lily asked me yesterday if you could be her papa. The question came out of nowhere. We were having breakfast, and she looked up from her porridge and said, "Mama, when will Mr. Edmund be my papa?" Just like that, as if it were a simple matter of timing. I told her that's not how things work, that you're our friend, and that's a precious thing on its own. That friendship is valuable and not to be dismissed. She accepted this with better grace than I did internally. Children's honesty is both beautiful and devastating. I write this not to pressure you, Edmund. Please understand that. But I promised myself I'd be honest in our friendship, and hiding this feels like dishonesty by omission. The truth is, Edmund, I could love you. Perhaps I already do. A little. Perhaps more than a little. But I'm also terrified in ways I haven't been since Thomas died. What if I'm a rebound from Victoria? What if the gap between our worlds is too vast? What if I let myself hope and then lose again? I barely survived losing Thomas. I don't know if I could survive losing you too. Forgive my vulnerability. Some days courage falters, and I wonder if I'm being foolish again, choosing feeling over sense. But then I remember, I chose feeling over sense with Thomas, and I had 2 years of genuine happiness. Perhaps that's worth the risk of pain. Catherine. Edmund sat at his desk for a long time after reading it, the letter resting on the polished mahogany, winter sunlight streaming through the window. His heart felt too large for his chest, full of emotions he'd thought Victoria had killed forever. He wrote back immediately, the words flowing faster than any correspondence he'd composed in his life. Catherine, your vulnerability is not weakness, it's trust, and I'm honored by it, humbled by it. That you would share these fears with me feels like a gift I'm not sure I deserve. I won't lie and say I'm certain of everything. I don't know precisely how we navigate the gap between Duke and seamstress, though I'm increasingly convinced that gap matters less than I was raised to believe. I don't know if I'm fully healed from Victoria's betrayal, though I know I'm healing in ways I couldn't have imagined 2 weeks ago. But I know this with absolute certainty. You're not a rebound. You're not a consolation prize or a replacement. You're not Victoria's opposite, defined by what she wasn't. You're Catherine, fully yourself, brilliant in your own right, complete without needing me to complete you. What I feel for you terrifies me too. It's different from what I felt for Victoria, deeper, more real, based not on who I want you to be or who I need you to be, but on who you actually are. Your strength, your grace, your hard-won wisdom. The way you love Lily with your whole heart. The way you've built a life from ruins that would have destroyed lesser people. I'm not asking you to risk your heart yet. I'm asking for time. Let me continue earning your trust. Let me prove, through action, not just words, that this is real, that I'm committed to becoming someone worthy of you and Lily. And tell Lily that I can't be her papa yet, but I would be honored, more honored than I can express, to be someone who loves her and her mother, if they'll allow it. If, when the time is right, they'll have me. Yours, Edmund. He sealed it and sent it before doubt could make him reconsider, then spent the rest of the day unable to focus on anything else. On January 6th, Epiphany, 12th night, the traditional end of the Christmas season, Edmund invited Catherine and Lily to Ashford Estate. It was a significant gesture, deliberate and meaningful, bringing them into his world, his actual home rather than the impersonal railway station or Catherine's modest flat. Letting his staff see them, making clear his regard, his intentions, the direction his heart was travelling, Catherine had hesitated when he extended the invitation. "Edmund, I don't have appropriate clothes for visiting an estate. Nothing suitable for—" "Please," he'd interrupted gently, taking her hand across the small table in her flat. "I'm not inviting you to a formal function. I'm not asking you to perform or be anything other than yourself. I'm inviting you to my home. As yourself. There's no performance required, no expectations about dress or manners or any of that nonsense." She'd studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Yes, we'd like that." They arrived mid-morning in Edmund's carriage. He'd insisted on collecting them himself rather than sending it empty, wanting to see their first reactions to the estate. Lily's eyes went impossibly wide as the house came into view, the sweeping gravel drive lined with ancient oaks, the honey-coloured stone facade with its classical columns, the manicured grounds that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Do you live here all alone?" she asked, pressed against the carriage window, her breath fogging the glass. "In this whole giant house? Just you?" "I have staff," Edmund said, smiling at her wonder. "But yes, mostly alone. It's too big for one person, isn't it?" "It's too big for 10 persons, Lily declared with the absolute certainty of childhood assessment. "You could fit our whole building in here, maybe 2 of our buildings." Catherine said nothing, but Edmund saw her taking it all in the obvious wealth, the generations of privilege represented by every perfectly maintained inch. He wondered what she was thinking, whether the gap between their worlds felt suddenly insurmountable. Harrison greeted them at the entrance with perfect courtesy, his elderly face betraying nothing but professional welcome. "Your Grace, Mrs. Briarwood, Miss Lily. Welcome to Ashford Estate." Edmund gave them a tour, but not the formal tour he would give titled guests, not the recitation of historical facts and family achievements meant to impress and establish social superiority. Instead, he showed them the places that mattered to him personally. The library where he'd spent his lonely childhood, hiding among books when his parents' cold marriage made the rest of the house unbearable. The kitchens where he'd been taking meals with staff, breaking down barriers he should never have erected. The music room with its pianoforte that no one had played since his mother died. The portrait gallery where generations of Ashfords stared down with varying degrees of severity, and Edmund found himself hoping he'd become someone different from them, someone who measured success differently. Finally, he led them to the conservatory, his favourite room in the entire estate, perhaps the only place that felt truly his. It was a glass-walled sanctuary filled with winter jasmine just beginning to bloom, early hellebores in shades of purple and white, climbing vines that would explode with flowers come spring. The air smelled of earth and growing things, warm and humid despite the January cold outside. "This is beautiful," Catherine breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. Lily immediately began exploring, exclaiming over every new flower, every interesting plant. Edmund turned to Catherine, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since adolescence. "I wanted you to see this, to see my life, my world, because I need you to understand something. This place, this title, these responsibilities, they're part of who I am. I can't pretend otherwise, but they're not all of who I am, and they're not the most important parts." Catherine looked around at the beautiful space, at the obvious wealth and privilege it represented. "What are the most important parts?" she asked quietly. "The parts I'm only just discovering," Edmund said, stepping closer to her. "The man who sits with tenants and really listens to their concerns, who sings Welsh lullabies to sleepy children, who writes letters to a wise woman who sees him, truly sees him, his flaws and failures and possibilities, and doesn't look away, who wants to build something real, something meaningful, not just something impressive." Before Catherine could respond, Lily's voice cut through the moment with the perfect timing of childhood innocence. "Mr. Edmund, you're not lost anymore," she said it matter-of-factly, examining a climbing jasmine vine. "So you don't need finding, but Mama does." Both adults turned to stare at her, startled by the observation. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, her voice slightly strained. Lily turned from the jasmine, her small face serious with 7-year-old wisdom. "Mama, you're always helping everyone else find things. You helped Mr. Edmund find his not lost. You help me find my courage when I'm scared of the dark or mean children. You help Mrs. Davies find words for her stories when she gets stuck. You help the Fletcher baby find sleep when she cries." She paused, considering. "But nobody helps you find things. Except maybe Mr. Edmund could, if you let him." Catherine's eyes glistened with sudden tears. "Oh, Lily, I'm just saying," Lily continued with the matter-of-fact logic of children who haven't learned to complicate simple truths. "It's okay to let someone help you sometimes. You always tell me we all need help, that asking for help is brave, not weak. You're included in all, Mama. You count too." Edmund found himself kneeling beside Lily, his heart full of love for this remarkable child. "She's right, you know. You've helped me find my way out of darkness I thought was permanent. Maybe you could let me help you find yours. Not because you can't do it alone, you've proved over and over that you can, but because you don't have to. Because accepting help doesn't diminish your strength." Catherine brushed tears from her cheeks, laughing a little even as she cried. "When did my daughter become so wise? How did you get so smart?" "She learned from her mother," Edmund said softly, rising to his feet. Lily, with the impeccable instinct children have for knowing when adults need privacy, suddenly announced she wanted to explore the far end of the conservatory. "There are so many plants I haven't seen yet. Call me if you need me." She skipped away, leaving them alone among the flowers and winter light. Edmund and Catherine stood facing each other, suddenly shy despite all the letters, all the conversations, all the growing intimacy between them. Winter sunshine streamed through the glass roof, illuminating dust motes in the air, making everything feel suspended, sacred. "I'm in love with you," Edmund said. The words came out simple, honest, direct. No elaborate declaration, no poetic metaphors, just truth. "I don't know if it's too soon to say. I don't know if you're ready to hear it, but it's true. And I'm tired of being anything less than completely truthful with you." Catherine took a shaky breath. "Edmund, you don't have to say it back," he continued quickly, not wanting her to feel pressured. "You don't have to decide anything right now. But I needed you to know. Whatever you choose, however slowly we need to move forward, my feelings are real. You're not Victoria's replacement, you're nothing like her. And that's not why I love you. You're Catherine, the woman who showed me what authentic love looks like, how it acts, how it persists, how it transforms everything it touches." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, emotions playing across her face like weather patterns, fear and hope and longing and uncertainty all at once. Then, with the courage that defined her, the same courage that had let her choose love over security once before. "I love you too," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Goodness help me, I do. I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible and careful and protect myself. But I love you. You, Edmund, the man who sings lullabies and apologizes to tenants and writes me honest letters about his doubts and fears. Not the Duke with the grand estate. You, the person underneath the title." "They're the same person now," Edmund said gently, stepping closer. "Finally, they're the same person. That's what you taught me. That's what these past 2 weeks have been about. Integrating all the parts of myself instead of compartmentalizing them. You did that for me." He stepped closer still, giving Catherine every opportunity to retreat if she wanted. She didn't. Slowly, telegraphing his intention so she could stop him if she wished, he cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was warm beneath his palms, soft and real and present. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," she breathed. "Please, yes." The kiss was tender, careful, full of possibility. Not desperate or consuming, not the passionate embrace of people trying to lose themselves in sensation. Just real, present. Two people choosing each other with full awareness of the choice they were making. When they parted, both were smiling, slightly dazed. "Well," Catherine said, slightly breathless, a flush coloring her cheeks. "That was worth waiting for," Edmund suggested, unable to stop smiling. "I was going to say inevitable, but yes, also that." From across the conservatory, Lily's voice carried with perfect comedic timing. "Are you kissing? Mama, is Mr. Edmund kissing you? Because I think that's what papas do. They kiss mamas. I've seen it in the park." Catherine laughed, her flush deepening. "Lily Margaret Briarwood, mind your own business." "I'm just observing," Lily called back innocently. "You tell me to be observant. I'm being observant." Edmund couldn't help but grin. "She's not wrong, you know. That is something papas do. among other things, like teaching children to ride horses and reading bedtime stories and attending school performances. Edmund, Catherine warned, but she was smiling, her eyes bright with happiness and hope. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, lunch in Edmund's formal dining room, Lily delighted by the grandness of it all, but even more delighted by the cook's gingerbread, which Mrs. Bennet served warm with fresh cream. A walk through the estate grounds despite the cold, Edmund showing Catherine the tenant cottages being repaired, explaining his plans for better estate management with an enthusiasm that made her smile. "I want to do something meaningful with all this," he told her as they walked, Lily running ahead to examine snow-covered garden statues. "Not just maintain wealth and status for their own sake, but use what I have to make actual difference in people's lives. I'm thinking about tenant profit sharing, letting them benefit directly from good harvests, educational programs for tenant children, fair wages for estate workers that allow them to save, to improve their own circumstances." Catherine listened intently, asking questions, offering thoughts, gently challenging some ideas while supporting others. They were partners in this conversation, equals despite the vast gap in their material circumstances. Edmund valued her input, not out of condescension, but because her perspective, shaped by actual hardship, revealed blind spots his privilege had created. As the sun began to set, painting the winter sky in shades of pink and gold, Catherine said reluctantly, "We should go. Lily has school tomorrow morning, and it's a long journey back to our flat." "Or," Edmund said carefully, his heart beating faster, "you could stay, both of you, in guest rooms," he clarified quickly, not wanting her to misunderstand. "Properly separate, completely appropriate. No expectations. But it's late, and cold, and I have more guest rooms than I know what to do with. The journey back would take an hour, and you'd arrive home exhausted." Catherine considered this, then called to Lily. "Sweetheart, would you like to stay here tonight? In this big house, like a castle in one of your stories?" Lily's shriek of delight was answer enough. "Really, really, truly? Can I sleep in a room with a big bed and a fireplace like in the fairy tales?" "Really, truly," Catherine confirmed, smiling at her daughter's joy. That evening, after Lily was settled in a guest room marveling at the four-poster bed, the fireplace that Harrison lit specially for her, the luxury of space and warmth and beauty, Edmund and Catherine sat in the library. A fire crackled in the hearth. Tea steamed in delicate cups between them. The room was quiet, peaceful, intimate, in a way that had nothing to do with physical proximity and everything to do with emotional connection. "This still feels like a dream," Catherine admitted, curled in a leather chair that probably cost more than her annual income. "A beautiful, impossible dream that I'll wake from any moment." "Why impossible?" Edmund asked, leaning forward. "We're here. This is real. What makes it impossible?" "Because you're a duke. I'm a seamstress who takes in mending to pay rent. Because society will judge us harshly, they'll say I'm a social climber, that you're having some kind of breakdown. Because Victoria—" She stopped, shook her head. "Victoria is married and irrelevant," Edmund said firmly. "She made her choice. We're making ours. And yes, society will judge us. Some people will disapprove. Some doors may close, drawing rooms that will no longer invite us, families that will consider us scandalous." He took Catherine's hand. "But Catherine, other doors will open. Doors to people who value character over pedigree, substance over superficiality. And frankly, if people can't accept you, can't see your worth, your strength, everything remarkable about you, then they're not people I want in my life anyway." "You say that now," Catherine said softly. "But what about in a year, 5 years, when the reality of social exclusion sets in, when your peers treat you differently because of me? I say it, and I'll keep saying it, and I'll prove it through action." Edmund squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight, Catherine. I'm not asking for an immediate answer or a binding commitment. I'm asking you to let this unfold, to trust that we can navigate the challenges together, to believe that what we have is worth the obstacles we'll face. Can you do that?" Catherine looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, at the sincerity in his eyes, the determination in his expression, the love that was written plainly for anyone to see. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I can try. I can choose hope over fear. I can let myself believe." Later, standing at the library window looking out at the moonlit grounds, Edmund reflected on the journey from Christmas Eve to now. 2 weeks. In some ways, it was absurdly short. He'd known Catherine for barely a fortnight. His servants had been in his employ longer than he'd known the woman he loved. In other ways, it felt like a lifetime. Like everything before Christmas Eve had been preparation for the moment Lily asked if he was lost too. He had been lost, profoundly, completely lost. Not just in the station, though that was certainly true, but lost in his own life, in beliefs about love and worth that Victoria's betrayal had both shattered and revealed as false. Lost in the idea that titles and wealth defined value, that social position determined happiness, that love could be calculated like a business transaction. Lily had found him. Catherine had helped him find himself. And in finding himself, he'd found them. Found a family he hadn't known he was searching for. Found a purpose beyond maintaining status. Found a definition of home that had nothing to do with marble floors and everything to do with belonging. Christmas hadn't been about the magic of the season, despite the decorations and carols and festive atmosphere of the railway station. It had been about the courage to accept unexpected grace, to let go of bitterness that was poisoning him from the inside, to open himself to love in forms he hadn't anticipated, from people he'd been taught not to see. Victoria had broken his heart, yes, but that breaking had been necessary. It shattered his illusions about what love was, forced him to confront what he'd been accepting as affection. Without that pain, he never would have been standing alone in a railway station on Christmas Eve, never would have been receptive to Lily's simple question, never would have been capable of recognizing Catherine's worth, her strength, her remarkable capacity for love despite loss. The breaking made space for the healing. The ending made space for the beginning. Loss made space for discovery. Catherine joined him at the window, slipping her hand into his as naturally as breathing. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "That I was wrong," Edmund said, watching snow begin to fall softly outside. "Last Christmas, standing in that station feeling sorry for myself, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But I hadn't lost anything real. I'd lost an illusion, a fantasy of what I thought love should be. And in losing it, I made room for something true." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, fitting there as if she'd always belonged. "Lily was right, you know. Being lost is just being somewhere you haven't figured out yet. Christmas is for finding things again, for rediscovering what matters." "What did you find?" Edmund asked, wrapping his arm around her. "Hope," Catherine said simply. "I thought after Thomas died, after Victoria's cruelty, after all the struggles to keep Lily fed and warm and happy, that I'd used up my hope, that I'd survive. Certainly I'm too stubborn not to, but never thrive. Never dream of anything beyond getting through each day. Then you appeared at the station, lost and sad and kind, and I started dreaming again. Started believing that maybe life held more than just survival." "What do you dream now?" Edmund asked, genuinely curious about the shape of her hopes. "A life where Lily has security and opportunity, where she doesn't have to choose between love and survival the way I did, where I can love someone who loves me back truly, completely, without calculation or conditions, where we build something real together, not perfect, but genuine, where we choose each other every day, not because we have to, but because we want to." She looked up at him, her brown eyes reflecting firelight. "Does that sound possible?" Edmund kissed her forehead gently, breathing in the scent of lavender soap and something uniquely Catherine. "It sounds like home," he said. "Yes, Catherine. It sounds exactly like home." Upstairs, Lily slept peacefully in her castle bed. The paper star Edmund had kept from Christmas Eve on the nightstand beside her, a reminder that being lost was just the first step to being found. Downstairs, Edmund and Catherine sat by the fire until late into the night, planning their future. Not perfectly, they both knew there would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, societal disapproval to weather. Edmund's peers would talk. Catherine would face scrutiny she'd never experienced. There would be difficulties neither of them could yet imagine, but they would face them together, building something real, something true, something worth all the pain that had led them to this moment. Outside, snow fell soft and gentle, covering the estate grounds in white, making everything clean and new. Inside, two people who had been lost had found their way home, not to a place, but to each other. And somewhere, in the quiet of the winter night, Christmas kept its promise, that endings make space for beginnings, that breaking creates room for healing, and that love, real, authentic, transformative love, always finds a way. And so, on that winter night, Edmund and Catherine discovered what Christmas had been trying to teach them all along, that sometimes we must be lost before we can truly be found, that broken hearts make space for deeper love, and that the most precious gifts often come wrapped in the most unexpected packages, like a little girl's simple question in a crowded railway station. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It helps more people discover stories about second chances and unexpected hope. And if you're new here, welcome to Lyra's Romance Stories, where we believe in love that transforms, heals, and endures. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale of hearts finding their way home. What moment in Edmund and Catherine's story resonated most with you? Was it Lily's innocent wisdom, Edmund's journey from bitterness to hope, or Catherine's courage to love again despite her fears? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing which parts of these stories speak to your own experiences. If you enjoyed this Victorian romance, you might also love Poor Lady gave her last bread to a beggar on Christmas Eve. Next morning, he returned as a prince. Remember, you are never truly lost. Sometimes you're just somewhere you haven't figured out yet. And Christmas, whether it's December or July, is always the perfect time for finding your way home. Thank you for spending this time with Edmund, Catherine, and little Lily. Until our next story, keep believing in second chances, unexpected grace, and love that transforms everything it touches. This is Lyra, wishing you all the warmth and wonder of the season.